Liz, your hair's thinning a little bit.
Listen, it's so many PhDs and so many master's degrees that like my brain is pushing the hair out of my head.
Yeah, this is pretty cool. I am here with my dear friend. I don't get to say that very often on the podcast. I mean, Liz and I are friends, which is cool, and we've had a few guests, but you are the first like truly dear friend and colleague. This is Dan Noyes. We could call him Dr. Dan Noyes just so he could fill into Liz's august letters next to her name.
Listen, I will take any sort of honorary degree or honorary title. I will take it.
Fantastic. So this is going out kind of the second week in May. Liz and I are actually that particular week coming up going to be in Portland, Oregon, but we were lucky enough to get Dan to drive all the way across southern New England to spend a little time with us, and I am beyond thrilled. We'll catch you all up on who he is and what he does and all that good stuff. But as per usual, I was saying to Dan before that Liz never knows what the intro is, and Dan and I were just having a spirited kind of lunchtime conversation together, catching up and talking about some of this weird AI stuff. And so this story is like a perfect fit for stuff you're thinking about. So, all right, there's this guy named Dario Amodei. How great is that as a last name?
Amodei.
Right? All right, so Dario Amodei is, he's like the Sam Altman, and, Anthropic is a group of folks. They have the Claude AI, all these wonderful names. And Anthropic is basically a group of folks who left OpenAI because they were more concerned about safety and security, but they're in there in the mix, duking it all out to become the world's greatest AI company, blah-de-blah-de-blah. But he made news. This will now be a month and change ago, but it's such an interesting story. So the title is Anthropic CEO Floats the Idea of Giving AI a Quit Job Button, Sparking Skepticism. This was published in Ars Technica in the middle of March. So Dan, I can tell you're on the edge of your seat. Shall I say more?
Please.
All right, so Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei made waves by suggesting that the future AI models might be given a quit this job button. Take this job and
shove it.
Nice job. Allowing them to opt out of unpleasant tasks, right? He acknowledged that this sounds completely insane. Good thing when the guy who's in charge of building what may be artificial general intelligence says stuff like, this may be completely insane.
What is insane to a weird billionaire strange man?
Yeah. Which, Dario, if you want to be a sponsor on ChatEDU, it's all good. He argued that it could help test whether future models deserve moral consideration, right? The remark connects Anthropic's recent hire of a guy named Kyle Fish. Do you have to have a cool name in order to work for these people? Yeah, the company's first full-time AI welfare researcher.
Oh, my God.
He is tasked with exploring whether advanced models could one day be conscious or morally relevant. Fish co-authored a 2024 report stating that there is a realistic possibility that some AI systems may soon meet the criteria for moral status. And this is kind of what we were talking about during lunch, right? It's a Star Trek thing, right? Do you want to describe?
It's totally a Star Trek thing when you start thinking about how do you define life?
And what happened, because there are Star Trek fans.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, Next Generation, TNG is what I'm talking about.
Okay, TNG.
What did I say?
No, I'm impressed with the acronym.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm one of the peeps. I'm a Trekker. What can I say?
Okay.
There's this great episode where Data, who's one of the main characters on the show, is there's a scientist from Starfleet who wants to study how Data and his positronic brain developed, and the scientist argues that Data's not a person, so he should be able to take him apart and study him. And thank God for Captain Picard, who comes in and saves the day. And he basically lays out, here's your definition of life. And Data, who is an android, meets all of, at least in Star Trek, the definitions of life, where he can, obviously he can think on his own, he can perform tasks, but he also reproduced. He used technology to create a daughter, and I was telling Matt I was doing this earlier, thinking about just what you were talking about is we might already be there. The argument was that we might get there someday, but I mean, you were telling me that AI is here and it's starting to think, and as biological life forms, I think we often think about ourselves as the highest in the universe. And, well,
Move over, Rover.
I mean, like it's like move over, Rover. That's so good. But I think we're there, and it's going to really change things as AI starts advocating for itself. I think that's going to be the big thing, which will happen at some point soon.
Right. And that's some sort of mark of sentience. All right, now listen, critics are slightly freaked out. They have blasted the proposal as anthropomorphism on steroids, arguing that task refusals are more likely the result of quirky training data than signs of discomfort. Still, Amadei and Mr. Fish, is Mr. Fish in the house? Are seriously considering exploring what does it mean to treat AI models not just as tools, but potentially as moral equivalents.
Well, here's the thing. Let's put the AI part of this aside for a second. But isn't that just the right way to treat anything? And I don't want to get all hippy dippy, tear in my eye type thing. But like, I feel like being empathetic to everything in the world matters, whether it be people or animals. And I just feel like if we were more empathetic to the trees, which, don't interact, they're obviously life, but we probably wouldn't be in this climate situation we're in. And listen, I know this is silly, but I say please and thank you to my technology all the time.
As well you should.
One, because I know they'll eventually be our overlords, and I think they'll treat us better if we say please and thank you. But it's just good practice to be a good person. And so this idea that we should just you suck AI, blah, blah, blah. It's just like, why would you want to be that person anyway?
And this, dear ChatEDU listener, is why I have called Dan Noyes my friend for at least since 2003. Fantastic. I'm Matt Mervis.
I'm Dan Noyes.
And this is ChatEDU, a podcast about AI and education. In today's episode, AI, but for who? A hard look at tech and equity. We'll have a great conversation with my dear friend and colleague, Dan Noyes. Dan is the former executive director of, isn't it funny when people say you're the former something?
It is weird.
I'm not eulogizing you.
No, but it feels like that'll be on my tombstone.
All right,
it's like former.
We'll change it. Yeah. Dan was the glorious former executive director of a really, really cool organization out of Boston, but now all over the place called Tech Goes Home. Dan and I have a rich history, which we'll certainly get into. But first in the news, Dan and I are going to explore an interesting phenomena coming out of the big three consulting firms with respect to AI. And then we're going to have a pretty wide-ranging conversation, which should go just 3 or 4 hours, about AI, tech, and equity. And of course, we will end this week with another Bright Bite. So Dan, do you know who the big three consulting firms are?
McKinsey, Bain, and who's the third?
Boston Consulting.
Boston Consulting, yes.
Which is funny
BCG.
You may hear in Dan's lilt a minor Eastern Massachusetts accent.
I'm trying to turn it off over here, but my father, if he's listening to this podcast, he lives down in Carver.
Where were you actually born?
Plymouth, Massachusetts.
Plymouth, yeah.
Yeah, so I grew up on the South Shore.
One of my favorite school folks is just about to retire and move to Plymouth, so I love Plymouth.
Lots of golf courses these days. Very different from when I was there.
And you now live in?
Auburn.
Which is right near Worcester.
It's right south of Worcester. You take 84 up there. And
okay, that's enough. All right. So yes, you got it right. McKinsey, Bain, and Boston Consulting Group. And these guys are killing it when it comes to AI. The consultancy business has grown dramatically, right? McKinsey expects to become a substantial portion of its business, up to 40% in AI-related work in the near future. Bain has grown by, I think, like 20%. And they're also trying to figure out how AI is going to help deal with a reduction in time for things like sales and marketing. And Boston Consulting Group has a 10% increase in revenue in 2024, reaching a mere $13.5 billion, with AI-related advisory services accounting for almost 20% of that total income. So it's really interesting as folks think about what organizations are really making money with AI, and are schools truly saving time, or businesses really having ROI or return on investment. Clearly, in the consulting world, it's going great. So there was an article in a place called The Ken. The Ken, swear to God.
Is it related to the Barbie?
So The Ken, April 1st, 2025. This is not an April Fool's joke, by the way, which is how AI is creating a rift at McKinsey, Bain, and Boston Consulting Group. So it's interesting, by the way, BCG, so Professor Ethan Mollick, who we mentioned now and again on the podcast, did one of the very first real like peer-reviewed studies demonstrating the productivity bounce of AI with Boston Consulting Group. That was the first kind of seminal benchmark study. Not that we needed one, honestly. It was pretty evident as you were using these tools that you were realizing productivity and efficiency and
People love their
outcomes.
studies, Matt. People love their studies.
People love their studies, especially the people who get paid to do the studies. So at top consulting firms like McKinsey, Bain, and Boston Consulting Group, generative AI is transforming workflows, creating a major tension. The drama fills, right? Rather than easing workloads, AI has led to shorter deadlines, unrealistic expectations, and declining appreciation for original thinking. And believe it or not, Dan, there's a rift between the younger folks and the older folks.
That is shocking, Matt.
I know, right?
That's shocking.
Junior consultants find themselves under pressure to use tools like ChatGPT to generate research and even client deliverables at breakneck speed, sometimes being scolded for not appearing to be using AI when they actually did. So they're claiming that the senior folks, let's just name the generations here, right? This would be the Gen Xers, think that a task that normally would have taken 2 to 3 weeks should be completed by these AI-enabled youngsters, millennials.
What's the next one? Gen Z.
Gen Z.
And then there's a new one or something.
I think Gen Alpha.
Alpha? God.
Yeah, your kids are even Gen Beta, or maybe on the cusp of Alpha Beta. You and I are an Alpha Beta soup between our various
the
children.
last 30 seconds of this conversation. Matt.
Okay, let's move on. So they believe that it should be done in a single day, 2 to 3 weeks of work in a single day. And so the results, according to the youngsters, we'll just call them the youngsters, decks that sound slick but lack substance, rushed analysis, and then growing resentment. Senior partners viewing AI as a magic bullet are widening the gap between expectations and what can actually get delivered, even with all the AI automation. So it really represents this kind of shift in the way work gets done. So Dan, you've run a big organization where you had both, old people like you, and,
we're the best.
and the youngsters.
Oh, those youngsters.
I mean, AI was just emerging, but what do you make of this whole consulting, big three consulting
Oh,
thing?
it's such a fascinating story, and there's so many levels. I think we should start with one. If you don't know how much money these places make, I think that you should think about that. So, for example, I know I'm not going to name names, but one of those big three I had conversations with about using, and for a 3-month engagement with 3 consultants, it was $2.2 million.
As a nonprofit. So you were the head, you were the
Yes.
ED of a nonprofit,
Yes.
glorious ED of a nonprofit organization,
Yes.
relatively small, out of Boston, doing important digital equity
Yes.
work. And for 3 consultants, they wanted what?
$2 million, over $2 million.
Okay.
So, and then don't get me wrong, some of them do pro bono stuff, but they'll typically do it with like big organizations. So they make so much money. And so I imagine when the higher ups who know probably a lot less about AI than the younger people do, when they see that and say, oh, I can take a 3-month engagement and make it 3 weeks. Well, all of a sudden, instead of $2 million, you're making $20 million. And so I think it's there. As an aside, something that someone told me once who was in corporate was that he was on the tech side. He said for the first time in his history of working for a corporation, and he'd been in there on the tech side for a while, the higher ups had come to him about technology advancement with AI.
Right.
So I think there's this excitement, if that's the right word. So I think that sets the plate here. You've got people who don't know maybe a ton about it, really excited about it. And why? Because it can make them a bleep ton of money. See, I bleeped myself there.
Well
Matt.
done. Andre, we didn't even need you.
We didn't even need me.
But be forewarned, Dan gets salty.
Man, let's start talking. We could talk about the Red Sox and then we really get going. It's fascinating to me that it's there. I don't think it'll last because there are limitations of AI. I think the key is going to be, and I think you've talked about this on this podcast quite a bit, it's what you put into it that's going to matter. So I would imagine that the junior people, their jobs are going to shift, where it's going to be less about, what they're currently doing, more about who is the best at creating, I can't remember what you call the input into AI, like when you type in prompts.
Yeah, sure.
And I think that's going to be the big thing because, having worked with some of these consulting firms, what they produce is incredible. Don't get me wrong. We had a great engagement with McKinsey and it was amazing.
So McKinsey was not one of the 3 that.
Well, they did it pro bono for us, which was fantastic.
At least Bain and Boston Consulting Group.
Listen,
Or
man,
somebody else.
or someone else.
Carry on, Dan.
But I think it's like everything. This is going to change everything. But this is, I think, the trap is that I don't know the people who are trying to make these decisions, obviously, but if you're a high up at one of these consulting firms, I think your revenue is what drives a lot of what you do. And if all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, if money becomes the driving factor for innovation, especially with AI, I think that's dangerous. Because then you mentioned earlier equity. It's like that just gets thrown out the window. It becomes maybe we'll spend 2% of our budget or 1% of our budget on that. And that just exacerbates problems that are already pretty terrible.
Right. Yeah, no, all solid insights, which is all I expect coming from you.
Thank you. Even though I don't have 15 degrees behind me. Although I have honorary degrees based on my intro. So now maybe I should say
that's right.
I need a business card that
Watch
has
out,
PhD on
Liz.
it.
Watch out, Liz. Yeah, so, one of the other interesting pieces from this story is the shift, because you have to imagine, too, that the customers now have these tools, right? So the story didn't go into a lot of detail here, but you can see it. I know that you're even doing a shift right now where you're moving from running this really cool organization to supporting other organizations doing this work. I won't use the C word, but as a consultant,
I was going to say, is that communism?
as a consultant or something like that. I mean, I don't know what you're going to call yourself. I mean, coach might be another awesome C word, because that's sort of what's happening. So if the clients of Bain and McKinsey and Boston Consulting Group have the same technology, the ideation, the innovation work that they do that they're famous for, even the studies, the analysis, the efficiencies, I mean, AI has all that insight, right? So they are purposely moving from kind of the design thought partner up front to the coach. And that becomes, I think, pretty interesting for our world of thinking about AI in education. I was, real quick aside, I was on a panel in Wilton, Connecticut. Actually, I'm wearing let's see if we can see it.
I really like it.
Isn't that nice?
It's a heart.
It is, yeah.
You do have a heart, Matt.
Yeah, well,
it's a little small.
They were very nice to send me this sweatshirt, because I sat on a panel, a bunch of folks talking about AI and the future of education. But there was an attorney from a firm that all the schools here in our corner of the world use, and she had the most interesting insight. She basically said, look what happens when the client has AI, right? So she was working with a client. So I think it was a sexual harassment case, and the client took all the stuff, right? They took the emails, the phone conversations, it was with an employee, there was an issue, and they ran it through a ChatGPT, and it poured out all this expert analysis. And so before the client meeting, the client sent her all this stuff. And at first she was like shocked, because she's like, that was my job. Like, my job was to do all this analysis for you, right? Find the relevant case law, but not just find the relevant case law. You took your inputs, there may be some small data privacy issue here, but you took all the inputs and then you ran them in ChatGPT and you got the case law and you had all this expert analysis. And so at first she's like, oh gosh, not only problematic for her, but also junior, right? Because she was more of our vintage. So the junior lawyers in her firm would have done that work. And she kind of had this epiphany, which was about this coaching. So she said, in reality, right, that's fine. Like, that's great if the client can quickly accelerate some of the problem-solving process. That means that my job is to be a human sitting with other human beings in the room, empathetically coming up with a strategy. Now we got all this great knowledge and insight. What are the skills that we need to take that knowledge and insight and get it done, right? And I think we'll see. This is all moving very quickly. But Liz and I very often reference this World Economic Forum report about what are the skills that kids are going to need in a world of AI. And it feels like that's the skill set, the coaching, the support, the human-to-human empathy, the strategy, the creativity. So anyhow,
I think you're spot on. I think this is all about knowledge, right? The history of our country has shown us that those that have it do really well, and those that don't. I do think it's interesting you bring up the legal one, because I was reading something recently that we keep talking about, what's AI really good at, and I think we spend less time talking about what AI is not good at. And one of the things I read about is AI is really bad at knowing when someone's lying.
Including itself.
Right, good point. And so when you think about legal case, in this case, it was an article about a hospital where an emergency room doctor put in all the cases afterwards, and it found that 50% of the time it was spot on, but a good chunk of the time it was not, because in specific cases you'd have someone come in and they would lie about drug use.
Patient, sure, right.
They'd lie about, he used the example of pregnancies, where someone would come in and say, there's no way I can be pregnant, and it's just like the AI took that. And so I think in your case, the legal side, it's like, I'm innocent. Well, the AI is going to be like, oh, yes, you're innocent. And so that empathy, that human piece, I think is huge. And then just one thing I want to touch on with that too is, again, you start thinking about who's going to get this knowledge and who's going to have these tools. And once again, I think we're seeing a replay of the internet rollout, where it's going to be those with resources that are going to have it. And so I think about that client who knew how to use AI is going to have a huge advantage over that other client who doesn't. And then you want to start diving into the demographics of those who doesn't, and it just exacerbates all of the racism and sexism and all of the issues that we have.
Yeah, which is a fantastic segue into our Beneath the Surface. So hold that thought. Dr. Dan Noyes sounds so great with the D's, doesn't it?
I think you should, my full name is Daniel, so I think it's Dr. Daniel.
Dr. Daniel Noyes.
Maybe I should have a podcast and just call myself a doctor.
Dr. Dan.
Isn't that what people do?
Apparently. Ask Liz. All right.
If you enjoy Matt and Liz's insights on AI and education, don't miss their next 6-week AI and K-12 education microcredential, launching this summer in partnership with Southern Connecticut State University. This self-paced online course covers AI essentials for educators, from foundational concepts to advanced skills like prompting, AI-driven assessments, and multimedia creation. Each cohort includes 4 live Zoom sessions for hands-on support, and participants earn a Credly digital credential. Visit skills21.org/AI/micro to sign up now. Group discounts are available for schools and districts. We hope you can join us.
All right, Dan, so now it's time to go beneath the surface. This is the meat to chew on here, the reason we are here, the reason we brought you all these miles from Worcester. And so Dan, as we said, was the executive director of a really cool organization called Tech Goes Home. But Dan and I actually met in 2004?
Five? I don't know.
Yeah.
20 years ago.
At a very cool school called the Lilla Frederick. You actually were an employee. I was just a helping hand.
You just told us what to do.
So
basically.
Set the scene. Tell us about the Lilla and the fantastic principal, Deborah Sosha.
Incredible place. Middle school, 6th to 8th grade. In one of the more challenging areas of Boston, high level of extreme poverty, high level of violence. I mean, everything you could think of, and yet the most wonderful, incredible families and kids. It was the first urban one-to-one laptop program in New England.
Yeah, south of Portland, Maine. I guess I would say. Yeah, it was the main. First we had in the Berkshires. We had a thing called the Berkshire Wireless BWI, the Berkshire Wireless Initiative, in like 2003, and that was just after Maine. Where if you want to just close your eyes and visualize the Apple iBook, the little white iBook.
The white ones.
Yeah, so it was that chapter.
Because what could go wrong with white laptops in middle school
kids? Yeah. Yeah, but a number of folks in Massachusetts who had really been inspired, some of the work that happened in Maine, did a project in the Berkshires, and then wanted to do a project in Boston.
Yeah, and it was amazing. And we had there were 650 students and about 100 plus staff, and so you had 750 plus MacBooks and all the white ones that got Cheetos on them. And it was really integrated, or as best as we could, into everything that was done. And there were a whole lot of successes and there were a whole lot of challenges. But it was I think it's hard to think back to, like, this is before there were touchscreens.
Yeah.
Like, there was no smartphone.
I think I had a Trio 800 at the time.
I think I had a Razor, one of the flip Razors. It was evolutionary or revolutionary or whatever oceanary you want to say. And what was amazing to me in that experience was how just incredible the students were.
Yeah, and the staff and the families. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the staff, they were good. Let me tell the perfect example of that. In the 5 years that we were doing it, we did not lose one student machine. Not one. Staff machines? Let me tell you, they were really good at losing them sometimes.
Good point.
I mean, the students just embraced it and they owned it. It was incredible to me to see. I loved it. And I think we learned a lot about what the capabilities are of just technology in general in an area in working with groups of people who are typically ignored or repressed or oppressed, and seeing the success that came out of it. I have so many stories I could tell, but one just thinking about how there was a large section of students who were special needs with significant physical disabilities, and just how as soon as they had technology, they could advocate for themselves. I mean, we had a kid who came in who was in low-level classes, and once they gave him a computer, he scored the highest on the state standardized test in the school. And so it just showed that all he needed was that doorway. And I think this is, unfortunately, that's a micro story, but the macro story is, and as we talk about AI, it's just once again, the people that could most benefit from this incredible tool are the least likely to have it.
And the way it's structured winds up also being a really important consideration in terms of access, right? So if we rewind to the Berkshire story or Maine, in all those contexts, I mean, it's so hard to think about this. It's not hard, but it's interesting to think about it now in light of the anxious generation, the iPhone, as you said, the touch screen, where we are with kids in screen time. But you have to think 2003, 4, 5, these weren't concerns we were having. We saw digital access as an unlock, a 21st century skill, a way for kids to do problem solving and project-based learning and applied learning and all sorts of really cool stuff. Also some really dumb dead ends, but you can hear it now and be like, oh, why would you do that? But it was a very different time in a very different context and setting. But one of the things that was unique about the Lilla versus the Berkshire or the larger Maine initiative was that the kids in all those previous projects, the laptops went home. Yes. So not only was it unlocking stuff in the classroom, it was also extending digital access to the school outside of the school day that was really different. And we should pause for a second because I have to say one of the big things, I was relatively young in my career at the time. You were younger than I was by a little bit. But, as I look back now, clearly one of the most important things is leadership, right? It's driven, consistent, clear leadership. And, there were leaders at every different level inside that building. The board had leaders, honestly, the state. We had a wonderful representative named Marie St. Fleur, who this wouldn't happen with. Apple had all sorts of leadership, the Mass Technology Collaborative.
The mayor.
Mayor, right, 100%, Mayor Menino. But Deb Socia, the principal, who didn't have a deep, background in digital learning, also just saw what she cared about were the kids and the families. And so, I remember some of the early conversations you were in there too going, well, what's weird here is that the kids can't go home with the laptops. And so, some principals have been like, oh, that's a bummer, right? But that wasn't Deb's
Let me go
case.
deal with the other 50,000 problems I have on my plate.
Of which there were tons,
oh
right?
my gosh. Yeah.
And she worked tirelessly, but she made space to make sure from an equity lens, right, that we addressed all parts of this puzzle, right? Wouldn't you say?
You're spot on. I think you can sum it up with Deb is that the focus was always the kid. It was just the time she got most upset were when people moved the priority away from the student. And I think that there are, obviously there are great principals and leaders out there, but that is what I saw in her. I mean, I again, this is someone who, if the school bus driver was having problems with kids, Deb would hop on the school bus. The community knew her because she was always there. There was a joke that people would drive by the school on Saturday night and they would see her light on, so they'd stop and check in. Dedication at a level that is unmatched. And to your point about the at-home piece, I just want to emphasize, too, the reason that the students couldn't take the machines home has nothing to do with the kids. As I mentioned earlier, 0 lost machines, right? The reason that they couldn't take the machines home is because they get the crap beat out of them for sneakers. Never mind a $1,000 MacBook in their back. It was a safety issue. We had to concern. So we did all of these little things. We had a cafe for parents that came in before school, and it was oversubscribed. And finally, the group of us were just we got to figure out a way to get tech and knowledge, because this wasn't just give someone a machine, into the home at night. And so there was an existing program, again, called Tech Goes Home, but it was very small. And we said, all right, let's take this and put it on steroids. And so we started with 6th graders, and we did 200 6th grade families. I thought Deb was crazy when she's like, I want all of them. And I'm like, isn't 99% good enough? No, I want 100. And God, we did it, which, we wouldn't have if she wasn't pushing so hard. Over the 3-4 years, we ended up doing every family in the building, or almost every family in the building. And it didn't matter whether you were a quadriplegic or you were the star athlete or whatever it was. Every student ran through this program, and then the city started paying attention to it.
Yeah, so for a sense of scale, right, the city had been running this program for a while, and it was a really neat initiative. There were some constraints, right? It was built on the idea of refurbished Windows desktop computers, right? There was a training experience for families, but it was kind of pre-internet, so the focus was more on like Windows and Office, and it was clear to us, this is, again, '05, internet's becoming increasingly important.
Right.
Deb empowered Dan and I to do a little creative thinking, and we did some creative thinking, right? So we started playing around. This is also in somebody's technology museum, but we started playing around with these little 7-inch Asus Linux laptops, barely laptops. They were these tiny little things, but we were able to put a custom image on them. So we organized some tabs on them under the themes of live, learn, earn, work, and play. So how many sixth grade kids do you remember roughly?
It was 200 plus a year.
Right. And so
straight years.
And how many do you think Tech Goes Home was doing in Boston on the Windows refurb machine citywide?
600-700 total.
Okay.
Including us.
Right.
So let's say 500 without us.
It became the majority of the city's deployment of Tech Goes Home under a new model. But the city was awesome, right? It was like a very collaborative thing where we were able to innovate because we had this unique need that kids had at the Lilla Frederick. But it was different than, the rest of what was happening in the city. All right, then fast forward a little bit. What happened?
Yeah, so this is where I think Tom Menino, the mayor, deserves a shout out because this guy had never touched a computer before in his life. He had a computer on his desk. The only purpose it was there is when cameras came in and stuff. So it looked like he knew how to use a computer. But he saw the digital divide before there was a digital divide. So he continued to support this program, and then in 2009, 2010, something like that. If you remember, the economy cratered, going from Bush to Obama. Then we had the stimulus money, Obama money it was called. And so the city put together a bunch of groups, and it was the community centers, it was the libraries, it was the schools, it was some of the older adult housing places, it was public housing, and Tech Goes Home. And so this is when they brought in Deb and I and you to basically say, all right, what if we took this beyond just a middle school program? Because at the time it was like 5th grade to 8th grade was the vast majority. And like what happens when people like us get in rooms, we're just like, why is it just 5th and 8th grade? Why don't we do all grades? And then it was like, well, why is it just kids and families? Why can't it be adults? And then it was like, why isn't seniors? And then Matt one day is like, why not little kids? And then Matt one day was like, why not small businesses? And this is what consultants do. They run away and then they tell us what to do and we figure it out. But it ended up very, very quickly going from serving a few hundred people a year to, I think by 2015, we were up to over 5,000 people just in the city per year. And it really changed, I think, how organizations run, the library, the homeless shelter, the church, the whatever it was, because they started to see, oh my gosh, the benefit. It's not even benefit, the need, the critical need of these resources.
Yep.
And so like in the homeless shelters, we worked with this women's day shelter where they make these incredible things like, out of, they sewed and knitted and they sell them on the street, but we taught them how to use Etsy. And so there was one woman, she's like, I made $6,000 last year just selling my scarves. And then it was like, how many people found a job? And anyway, I could go on forever about all these things. But
well, because there's such good stories and such good impact, but it's also worth underscoring that the impact, it was a small team, right? It was you and Deb and...
It was me and Deb, and then Theo Higginson came in as an AmeriCorps
So a 3-person team, essentially, for a number of years, serving how many thousands of families in the city and seniors and entrepreneurs?
Like 3, 4, 5,000. Okay. And then Deb went off to actually run this incredible org in D.C. doing advocacy work called Next Century Cities. And so it was just Theo and I for a while.
So what year did you take over as executive director?
2014.
Okay, great.
It was CEO, by the way, Matt.
Oh, sorry.
CEO.
Sorry.
This is something we do to nonprofits. We call them EDs as opposed to CEOs.
Yeah.
But yeah, it came in 2014. And then what really changed it just quickly is the pandemic.
Yeah.
And so like there's many lives, if you think about critical moments of the organization, it's just like in 2016, we did our first strategic plan. It really grew. And then the pandemic hit and it was just like all of a sudden everyone For years, we've been shouting from the mountaintops, like, how are you supposed to educate? How are you supposed to work without having this stuff? And then all of a sudden, everyone saw that you can't educate and you can't work without this. And so we definitely became the belle of the ball for a little bit. But of course, what that did is it significantly increased the demand. And that's the scary thing about this digital divide, even today after the pandemic, is there's upwards of 70 million people in the U.S. that don't have internet access.
Rural and urban.
In fact, 75% of the divide is urban. And what you see is that it's just sheer numbers. Is like as a percentage, sure, you have these rural towns where 40% are without internet. And don't get me wrong, that's a problem in itself. But you go to these big cities and it might be 10%, but 10% of a million people is under that. So you're talking about, like in Massachusetts, for example, where I'm based, 92% of the digital divide is in urban areas. Part of that is that redlining, obviously, we talk about, if you don't know what that means, it's that internet companies don't want to provide internet in poorer areas because they can't make enough money.
And these are essentially cable companies, right?
Yeah, cable. It could also be wireless nowadays. I mean, you certainly have the other crews. And the issue in the rural areas is if you live on a farm and you're 3 miles from the nearest spot, putting a fiber cable to your house is too expensive.
Right. We'll roll into AI in a second, but just like give us a state of the state in terms of digital equity, tech equity. And Techozome has always, I think, referred this as not just, as you said, it's not just tech. It's kind of like it's the hardware, it's the pipe, the broadband access, whatever that looks like, and the skills certainly to be able to take advantage of those other two factors, right?
And I think the example I use with people is everyone has a story about their mother or father calling them with a tech problem, right? So imagine just you gave your parent a brand new computer without telling them how to do it. It would sit on the doorstop. So it's now that is the case whether you're 2 years old or 102 years old. The state, it's one of these deals where so much progress has been made in getting technology and internet access and skills out to people. Unfortunately, the demand and the critical need for it has grown to levels we would not have thought of because of the pandemic. You can't do anything anymore. I mean, you want a job, you want healthcare, you want to learn, you want anything you want to do. Like, for example, during the pandemic, to get a vaccine, you had to get online before they had phone numbers. Well, what group in this country is least likely to have internet access? It's older adults on Medicaid, the people who most need the vaccine. So you end up with this terrible situation where people didn't get it. And so examples of that are just cropping up. So we've got the speed of technology, which is incredible. All this AI is amazing. I'm fascinated by it. I'm on this podcast. And yet the people who need it most or could most benefit from it are least likely to have it. And that isn't changing because what you do with it is growing at such an incredible rate. It's just the progress the progress of solving the problem can't keep up with the progress of the critical need for the technology, if that makes sense.
And do smartphones and 5G networks, because if you think about developing countries all over the world, a lot of them have basically leapfrogged over legacy technologies like broadband, through mobile. So does that help or?
It's a great question. So one, we should throw out there, there's a whole lot of people who don't have smartphones. This is also a thing. And
super expensive.
Again, in Massachusetts, it's about 500,000 people don't have a smartphone. So there's a huge population that don't use them. I just think about yourself. I mean, if you were to shut down all of your technology but your smartphone, and I don't mean
podcast.
That,
yeah.
Right. Sure. And I don't mean just for a week. I mean forever. That's a hard thing. There's things you can do with it. But then you start thinking about, what about people with disabilities or people that, I just think there's so many benefits to having that computer still.
Yep.
Maybe someday the smartphone, especially with AI, it might be able to interact with things better, but we're just not there yet.
Okay. And so then AI becomes an interesting variable here too, right? So, I mean, AI is joined at the hip with the tech access. So in order to take advantage of anything, if we go back to our little Asus laptops, live, learn, earn, work, and play, which was really just a curated collection of internet resources around those kind of themes of technology for empowerment in life, AI is just an amplifier in each one of those categories. So if you still don't have the core access in terms of broadband and a device and the skills, AI is just furthering the deficit.
Exactly. So you think so it wasn't that long ago that ChatGPT launched their first, it was
November of 22.
Okay.
Late November of 22.
So the speed at which that has changed the world is so much faster than the speed at which people are learning how to use technology. And so what you end up with is those that already have it are learning it. And so they're just moving so much further ahead. So where are the voices in the communities being listened to? I know there's some projects where like localized AIs are trying to be built in neighborhoods.
Yep.
But again, you're talking about a neighborhood where a significant portion of people won't even be able to access it because they're on the wrong side of that divide.
Right. So, I mean, we can, just to bring that right down to the ground level, right? It's not really a theoretical problem. It is a real on-the-ground problem or challenge that is born out of the equity and access issue. So the way training data gets built in all of the language models, so just take ChatGPT's language model, is based on everything that it's learned on the internet. So the internet is not just a consumption technology, it's a publication technology. It's both down and up, right? And so if you have whole swaths of neighborhoods or corners of the world where the up isn't happening, where the publication of thoughts and culture and artistry and poetry, small problem here aside that they've taken all that stuff or stolen, whatever they
Right.
But nonetheless, it's not present, right? Because they're both not consumers, but they're also not like major producers in significant ways because the access just isn't there. Take just the city of Boston. If you've got, what percentage of the city of Boston has an equity and access gap?
Oh, it's like 20% or something like that.
Right. So I mean, that's 20% of stuff not getting published to the internet and therefore not getting scraped, therefore not in the training data. So there's that piece of it. Then there's also an algorithmic piece. Liz always makes fun of me because I'm forever referencing this movie called Coded Bias by Dr. Joy Buolamwini on Netflix. But then you also just have the AI that drives not the stuff that we read or write or produce within a ChatGPT, but the AI systems and the data behind the AI systems that influence criminal justice, healthcare, even educational attainment, college admissions. Those are all based on data sets. And so if communities of color and other populations aren't represented in those data sets, then we wind up having algorithms that are essentially don't reflect the data set of the people that are not represented in either the generative AI, the ChatGPTs, or the, do you get insurance AIs? So it is
or
a little bit of or alone,
or
certainly.
Healthcare
housing,
or
exactly.
treatment. Or,
right.
Yeah.
Sometimes we talk about this stuff and it sounds like a theoretical problem, but you can, if you just understand just enough about how training data works and how large language models learn. I mean, it's the same reason that some organizations, we covered a story where Mistral, which is, it sounds so French, right? So Mistral is a large language model company, although they make money, they sell stuff too.
Sounds like a type of wine or something.
Right. I'm having Mistral until the tariff hit. So, sorry.
It's true.
One comment. So Mistral has been building language models in Southeast Asia and other parts of the world that, are really trying hard to reflect the language and culture of the countries. Because if their information they're pushing up to the internet isn't reflected in the training data, then people aren't experiencing all the good. I mean, think of the 5 or 10 ways that any of you, me, anyone in the ChatEDU audience used AI in the last few days. So if it's not reflecting your culture, your society, your history, your families, then it's just not in the mix, right? So, all right. So Dan, what the hell are you going to do about that?
And I just want to add, we started the conversation thinking about the consulting firms. Well, you just imagine what the clients are asking of them. So, for example, Amazon, one of the largest employers in the world, as you might imagine, it's hard to hire people because they get so many applications, there's so many jobs.
From the robots?
From robots.
Oh, sorry, from people. Go ahead.
Or are the robots people, Matt? That's what we started with.
That's where we started. Go ahead.
And so if one of the big consultant firms is working with them on, how do we hire more efficiently, and they start using AI, well, now we're talking about AI determining who gets hired.
Sure.
And you know that we've had this conversation. I think you've told me about this. It's just like when AI looks at resumes and things like that, like it disproportionately pulls out things like if your name is Jose versus John, or if you have certain, if you like rap music versus classical music. I mean, just things like that are terrible. And one meta comment I want to make is we keep thinking about what are we going to do about it? Like, let's fix the AI. The problem isn't the AI. The problem is the society. It's like, where is the AI pulling from? It's pulling from us. Like, we shouldn't run away from the fact that it's learning from us. It's like remember that commercial when we were kids with a kid who does drugs and his dad finds him and the kid's like, I learned it by watching you. Do you remember that? That was a great commercial. That's what's going on here. It's like, and to your question, how do we fix it? God, if I know.
Well, but at some level, we are, thinking, oh, we have to deal with the AI equity gap. It's really just a reflection of what Tech Goes Home as an example of an organization is trying to solve. And there are many organizations all over the country. I know in Connecticut right now we have a new statewide, you've probably paid more attention than I have, but I don't know, are all states doing digital equity plans? Or
if they wanted to get money from the federal government, everyone needed one.
Okay, we'll pass on that. But yes, I think it...
But here's a point. If I could just interrupt you for a second.
Please.
Until the federal government said, we're going to give money out, this was like 3 years ago. Do you want to guess how many states had a digital equity plan? None.
Oh, really? Not even Massachusetts?
None. Huh. And so it's just like states are just catching up on this stuff. This is part of the problem. It's like,
but I guess my point is that so we don't need a whole nother world of AI problem solving in terms of equity. We need to understand that the problem got a little bit more nuanced, right, in the ways that we're describing, that the groups of folks in communities aren't represented in either the training data or underrepresented in these larger algorithmic AI systems that do healthcare and criminal justice. But it's really kind of like putting our shoulder behind the Tech Goes Home of the worlds. And I know you're now kind of moving into a world as a coach or consultant where there are many organizations like this, or some reasonable number of organizations like this. Is that fair to say?
I think what there are is there's lots of organizations that want to see the outcome. They might do it differently. Sometimes it's not about a computer. It's about a community organization that wants to add digital training to what we do at the Boys and Girls Club.
Gotcha.
So it could be, it's everything. You could be a corporation. I mean, Amazon, for example, I was just kind of ragging on them, but they do an incredible job educating employees. In fact, Amazon will pay for community college for any employee. And it's just so, what are they paying for? What type of resources are offered? I think one thing I would add to, I kind of, joked about the solution. I think advocacy, it has to start there, I think. So when we think about like the Tech Goes Home model and you think about getting machines so people can find jobs and they can learn, they need to know how to vote. They need to know how to contact their representatives. They need to know how to build coalitions. And because I don't think this will change unless the people who are most impacted by it, the power within them is activated. And I think that's what something like Tech Goes Home and other programs can do, is they can activate the power that exists within these communities. But for so many reasons, they've just been pushed down for so long. What I would love to see happen is someone, and maybe this is happening, you would know better than me, to actually go into the disconnected communities and compensate people for their wisdom around how AI could most benefit their lives. And one example, I think, of this is making connections, because this is something I saw quite a bit in my work, is that we often didn't have a resource problem. We had a getting to the resource problem. And I think this is where AI could be huge, is that say you're a single mom, and we all know how hard it is to be a single mom, and you probably have 10 major issues in your life. And trying to combat all 10 at once is insane. You can't do it. You have to focus on one first, but which one? So what if there was an AI model where I could go on 10 o'clock at night, my kids are asleep, I can put in all the challenges I'm facing in my life, and AI could say, you know what, based on all of this data and the atmosphere, we think you need to focus on this issue right now. Say there's an abuse issue, no harm. You've got to focus on this issue. And here's the person to call who speaks your language, and she will pick up the phone. And it's like, that is, I think, where this could really benefit. And that's just an example of, hell, if you did jobs, it's like, you know what? I lost my job. I have these skills. It's less about a Google search of, hey, here's 14,000 job boards. It's like, Gary works in this place, call him on Tuesday.
Yep.
And I think, I just think those, I know it's not like Star Trek-y, like big things, but when you want to talk about like changing society for the better, connecting people with resources, I think is, in my opinion, is where AI could really revolutionize things for the communities that need it most.
I love that. And I think that is what we're seeing, right? I mean, not necessarily in every corner of the world, but that is the difference right now between a Google search and the ability of AI to take a lot of context in. Here's all the crap I'm dealing with. Here's the answer. What we don't have yet is the like kind of, I hate this term, but it's the action, the agentic action that goes from, I understand all your context, I've got all this intelligence, let me help sort it out for you, to here's the actual number to call. Because right now that number could very well be hallucinated and send you to like a, comic book.
And I think this is where it's like, what input is going into the language model, if that's the right term to use.
Yeah. And there are, I mean, it's a really interesting point that you raise about, there are people getting paid right now to contribute training data. They tend to be, people like my son who's got like an advanced degree and he's a great writer. And so, or they're paying tons of money to people who have unpublished YouTube content, right? Do you know how much unpublished YouTube content there is in the world?
Hey, I have a 14-year-old and 9-year-old. I know.
Right.
That's a lot.
I'll tell you what, they're hunting for your girls because there's like all this stuff in their drafts.
Yes.
But right, if you could say, okay, great, there's a treasure trove of training data in communities where the potential could be realized in ways that outsize, what's going to happen for the Bain consultant to bring it full circle, that would be awesome.
Yeah. And then, I mean, there's the challenge of the capitalistic model of it, where it's, when we think about, obviously, you're getting data and wisdom and knowledge from represented communities or distressed communities, and it can't just be so OpenAI and Google make money.
Someone can make a buck. Yeah,
and
sure.
I think going back to what we said earlier in the conversation, it's just like I would hope. I mean, I think OpenAI. I don't know obviously as much as you do on this, but it sounded like it started off the right way in some way, and now it's kind of veered in some weird tracks, and like I'm disappointed. I saw Google, Google always had the do no evil thing, and then I saw a couple weeks ago that they removed their ban on using AI for weapon systems.
They also put a little shortcut on the home screen of their mobile app, which is the picture of a little cap and gown so that you can do like photo math, so you can take a picture of your homework assignment. So big things and little things, Dan. All right, but thanks, buddy. This ChatEDU will never be sponsored by Google,
I know,
OpenAI, Bain, Boston Consulting Group, McKinsey.
Listen, man, we're fighting the good fight here.
We're fighting the good fight.
No,
go ahead.
it is, and just taking a really big step back. I mean, like if you look at this like in the huge scale, it is incredible. Like watching what AI can do, especially someone who, I grew. My first email address was when I was in college, so it was just like I didn't grow up with this stuff, and just watching my kids interact and be able to do so much more with it is just amazing. So I know there's all of these issues, and I don't want to. I'm the biggest advocate for AI there is.
Yeah, but the potential has to be realized.
Yes.
And
we'll be better for. This is the thing. We'll all be. I mean, all rising tides rise all ships, or whatever that silly phrase is. It's so true. And it's just, I often think about like how many kids are living in poverty who could be the next, Einstein or Musk or whatever, whoever you want to pick who has developed these things. And there's a huge percentage of kids that will never realize that dream because they don't have access to these incredible, amazing tools.
Yep. So you're one of the folks, there are many people nationally who work on this. You're clearly one of them. If people are interested in this topic, not to our credit, ChatEDU has not really kind of taken a deep dive into this part of equity. Liz cares deeply and speaks a lot. I do too, but Liz is really, her PhD dissertation was about equity. She does a lot of work in this space, but this is the deepest dive we've taken, and I'm grateful for you to to, have some time to kind of walk our
thank
listeners through this. If folks want to connect with you or learn more, unpack more of this kind of interesting opportunity and challenge, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Just go to matttellsdanwhattodo.com. The story of our lives.
DanandValerie.com.
Daniel,
We're realsies.
DanielNoyes.com I've got that little website, and you can always reach me at dan@danielnoyes.com.
And that's Noyes.
It is. No, yes.
What's that? No, yes. Wow. How have I known you since 2005? I've never thought about that.
It's like we're confused. It's like I'm not quite sure what's going on.
No, yes.
I
love it.
Maybe.
All right, listen, Dan, each week of late, because it feels like we could use a little good news in the world.
I love this.
Yeah, we end with a little bright bite. So this is actually kind of really interesting in consideration of some of the stories that you were sharing from the Lilla Frederick. So the story is from Berkeley Engineering. We'll put this into the show notes at UC Berkeley. It is brain-to-voice neuroprothesis.
Good job on.
You think that's right? Restores naturalistic speech. So.
There's no way that was right, but I appreciate your effort.
UC Berkeley and UCSF, you're really a perfect fit in when Liz is not here.
I know. Liz is way too nice to you.
Oh, my God.
Liz is way too nice to you. She needs to drop down her PhD every once in a while and just slam it on the table.
No, yes.
No, yes.
UC Berkeley and UCSF researchers have developed a brain-to-speech tool, we'll just go with that restores real-time communication for people with severe paralysis. So the AI-driven system decodes neural signals from the motor cortex and streams speech with under a second delay. So this is a major step forward from what had been an 8-second lag. And this is really for folks who have had speech and access to speech. So the study centers on Anne, who's a woman who lost her ability to speak due to paralysis. She silently attempts speech while the system translates her brain activity into natural-sounding audio and describes the experience as more fluid and empowering, especially hearing her own voice again. I could cry when I read this. Yeah, this is published in Nature Neuroscience, and the work represents a critical step towards restoring authentic, real-world communication for those who can no longer speak.
That's amazing. Listen, I have a 3-year-old nephew who is significantly disabled and mostly blind, mostly deaf, on a ventilator, all those kinds of things. And he goes to Children's a lot, and he's doing well, which is great. And so hearing these stories and knowing that he's 3 now, so when he's 10, you think, all right, let's not do 10. Let's do, you said 2022 is Chat.
Yep.
So through 3 years. So when he's 6,
yep.
How much faster is this going to get? So he's going to be able to see better and hear better and talk better. And
yeah. So let's keep those bright bites coming. Yeah. So listen, Dan, at the very first, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, man.
I mean, honestly, for your friendship and for this conversation, really, really special. Liz, don't come back. No, just kidding. Actually, Liz and I are both away, so I can't say that.
Love you, Dr. Liz. Can I give a shout out to Dr. Liz's mom too?
Yeah.
Kitty, because I hear she's really the executive producer of this show. So if I'm going to be invited back, I think I need her approval. So Kitty, hello.
Well done, Dan. You didn't get to be the CEO,
that's
not executive director, the CEO for nothing. All right, so listen, Liz normally wraps this up by telling us it's time to do something. Do you know what that might be?
I think it's time.
It's something about credits.
Credits?
Yeah, it's something about roll
the credit. Wow, that's old school for an AI podcast.
I know, right?
Roll the credits.
So, Dan, I think it's time to
roll the credits.
Thanks, brother.
As always, we'd love to hear what you think. So please let us know at ChatEDU@edadvance.org. That's EDADVANCE.org. And also rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you are using. ChatEDU is brought to you by EdAdvance, the nonprofit regional education service center in Litchfield, Connecticut. This episode of ChatEDU is sponsored by the National Center for Next Generation Manufacturing. ChatEDU is recorded, edited, and produced by Andre Angelo and Justin Pasco, whose dedication and expertise bring our discussions to life. ChatEDU's executive producer is the multi-talented rock star Cameron Audia. Additionally, we are grateful for the support of our colleague Gary Robinson, and we appreciate his time and talents. And of course, a big ChatEDU shout out to our fearless leader and executive director, Jonathan Costa, for inspiring the pod. And finally, a heartfelt thank you to our listeners for joining us on this journey exploring the thoughtful and innovative integration of AI in education.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan Costa, and I am the Executive Director at EdAdvance, and I want you to know how much we appreciate our listeners. If you enjoyed the podcast, feel free to explore EdAdvance's other AI services, which include customized professional learning of all kinds, conferences, and our micro-credential co-sponsored by the Southern Connecticut State University Office of Workforce and Lifelong Learning. Just visit skills21.org/AI to learn more. That's all for now, and thank you again for listening to ChatEDU.